Coming up in This Week in Computer Hardware, NVIDIA's RTX 2080 GPUs. We got benchmarks, talk RTX games, and let you know if it's time to buy. $55 CPUs, Athlon is back. Coffee Lake S pricing. What is Intel thinking? All that more coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiCH.
This is TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 484, recorded on September 20th, 2018. Should you buy NVIDIA's RTX 2080? Listen and learn.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Introducing Rate Shield Approval. If you're in the market to buy a home, Rate Shield Approval locks up your rate for up to 90 days while you shop. It's a real game changer. Learn more and get started at rocketmortgage.com/twit.
Welcome to TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, TWiCH weekly show. Well, quite frankly, that's going to be talking a lot about GPUs today, but we're also really interested in desktops and laptops and mobile and consoles and occasionally small Internet of Things devices, especially the ones that threaten to bring down your whole home network, especially when they're light bulbs. Yes, light is important, people. Light with IP is dangerous. I'm Patty Norton, joined as always by Mr. Ryan Shrout, who is, I believe, actually at home in beautiful Florence, Kentucky.
I am. I'm at home. I think I'm home for like 2 weeks solid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's crazy. You were also
I was gone last week. I was at Disney World. So that technically not at home, but a personal trip. So I think that counts. That's on me, not on work. Right.
Plus, you and your wife, huge Disney enthusiasts. I understand that you have.
That's why I left her at home this time. It was just me and my daughter this time. We did the daddy-daughter thing again. A lot of fun.
Oh, okay.
Mom gets her momcation time, right? Goes and gets manicures, pedicures, that type of stuff, and it all works out.
I just had this horrifying moment. I was like, wait a minute, you left your wife and child at home and went to Disneyland and weren't murdered upon return? Like,
no, just
maybe
just one
not.
of them.
Okay. Yeah. That's actually a really nice thing to do. Yeah, another nice thing to do. Everybody I talked to, right, earlier this week, made the rounds, as it were. And there was some conjecture about the performance of the GTX 2080, or as I like to call it, the RTX 2080. Let's talk about the new GPUs from NVIDIA, right? Because that's kind of the big thing this week, by far. Yep. The 2080 shipping. The 2080 Ti is delayed at least a week. The 2070, we have no idea when it will ship. There are no RTX games. The update to the Tomb Raider game is going to be the first ray tracing, like live RTX ray tracing enabled game. We're waiting for the patch on that. The first new game, Battlefield 5, is going to ship in November. It kind of slipped in November, but should be available in November. So RTX games are starting, or we are hoping they will be trickling out. Card availability is not awful. MSRP, they're actually all really within about $50 of MSRP, the third-party cards that are still available. I was laughing on Tuesday because as we shot Tech Thing, all of the sales pages on NVIDIA's website disappeared, and which I thought was really amusing. Like all of a sudden, you couldn't even try to order a 2080. But let's talk about RTX 2080, RTX 2080 Ti. I feel like I'm going to guess here. If you are a 4K gamer and you have a 4K monitor and you want all the pixels, the 2080 Ti is attractive.
Yep.
The 2080. I believe you said was on parity with a 1080 Ti when we were talking in pre-show, like 30% above a 1080. Okay. How are you feeling about these cards right now? Because in one sense, on today's games, you're getting a healthy bump in exchange for a healthy increase in cost.
Yeah. So if we can talk about the fundamental architectural stuff a second, because the performance of the cards is good, but I think not the revolutionary thing that a lot of people were expecting. If you remember back to the launch stream when the CEO Jensen was on stage talking about the products, they didn't really talk about anything except ray tracing performance. They didn't really dive into anything about the games that you can play today and what that performance level would look like. Then a couple days later, they let the media put out like one slide that showed performance, but it was a little bit not misconstrued. It was a little bit kind of calculated of a move because they included a lot of HDR performance in that, and the HDR performance on the 10 series has a little bit of a performance hit, whereas on the 20 series it doesn't. So it kind of expands that gap quite a bit. And they were obviously picking the games that looked the best for them. They also NVIDIA, that document right there. NVIDIA likes to compare the GTX 1080 to the RTX 2080, again, which that graphic right there is doing. And that makes sense from a naming scheme and kind of from a GPU, like a relative GPU die configuration standpoint. In other words, like this is GT 104, and we're comparing it to GP 104. But from the community standpoint, from gamers and reviewers and enthusiasts, what we have been used to doing over the last couple of generational leaps is comparing, the 80 versus the previous Ti, right? So if you go back to when the 980 Ti came out and it replaced the GTX 780, or it supplanted the GTX 780, and then when the GTX 1080 came out, it was quite a bit faster while also being quite a bit more efficient than the GTX 980. And in this case, if you make that same comparison, if you go with the RTX 2080 and compare it to the GTX 1080 Ti, you don't really get those. You don't get that same difference. The efficiency, the power consumption is pretty close. The RTX 2080 is a little bit more power efficient, but not a whole lot. Maybe 10 watts less power draw in our testing. And then from a performance standpoint, it's pretty much a dead even race between the RTX 2080 and the GTX 1080 Ti. And I would say it leans in favor of the RTX 2080 by a handful of %, 5 or less. And there are a couple of cases where the 1080 Ti is actually faster. So it's a mixed bag in terms of that performance comparison. And then when you bring in the pricing into it, that's when things get pretty messy, because the RTX 2080, the Founders Edition, the one that NVIDIA sent out for review, is $799, I believe, right? Right. Which means that if you compare that to the launch price of the GTX 1080 Ti, it was $699, right? So for $100 more, Founders Edition versus Founders Edition, you are getting a almost equivalent performance, maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit more efficiency. So you're paying more for that. Technologically speaking, you're getting a lot more out of the RTX card. You're getting GDDR6 memory. It's running at 1,400 gigabits per second, or 14,000 gigabits per second instead of 11,000. Your memory bandwidth goes from 484 gigabytes per second to 616 gigabytes per second. Your peak theoretical compute goes from 10.6 to 13.4. 12 to 18 billion transistors. There's a lot more technology going on in the RTX 2080 than in the GTX 1080 Ti. But most of that appears to be tied up in the ray tracing capability and the AI capability of the Turing GPU, which, as you brought up at the beginning of the discussion, is not accessible in any actual games you can play today, and that's kind of problematic.
So we're looking at these cards. We're looking at a premium price, in part because it's the Founders Edition, and NVIDIA's gotten into the habit of extracting kind of a payday. I don't know, maybe that's not the nicest way of saying it, but they kind of release the first round of these cards. They're overclocked. They're more expensive, by a fairly large percentage of value, and I think it's they're turning a big ship. They're kind of moving us from where we've been in the last several years to real-time ray tracing. They've made some. It's amazing to realize how complicated these cards are. and how sophisticated the technology is. I just wish there was more RTX content available or RTX ready content available at chip, because none of these are bad cards in terms of existing gaming performance. And certainly, if you're moving a metric ton of pixels on a 4K monitor, you'll probably be staring at that 2080 Ti, going like, "I'm good. Come on, I got it. Cut me the check, or I'll cut you a check." Just because it's a pretty healthy bump, but we were talking last week. You don't, or the week before. You don't feel, because one of the pundits was claiming that early 2019 we were going to be seeing a massive process drop and a massive decrease in power consumption, an increase in performance, probably a reduction in price. Does that sound like somebody writing a title to get traffic, or does that sound like something that might actually happen next year? I mean, obviously most people should wait until after the Founders Edition and get the regular edition of the card. Do we even have an idea when that's going to show up?
So it depends on what you mean by regular. In terms of just like third-party AIC cards, add-in card vendors, custom coolers, all that. Those are available already, right? You'll see them for sale on NewEgg and Amazon. We have a handful here. If you're talking about normal being the price lower models, yes. Remember that one. This is interesting in that the Founders Edition this time is more expensive than the base, which it was before, but it's also overclocked out of the box as opposed to running at kind of quote unquote the reference speeds, which creates a different dynamic, right? Because before the Founders Editions were base clocks, but more expensive. And we kind of looked at it as, okay, NVIDIA wanted to create cards. They wanted to build their own for people that just want the one directly from NVIDIA, but they didn't want to step on their partners' feet by competing at the same performance level, even though we all know they're all overclockable and whatever. So this time they said, look, we're going to charge more for them. We need to be in the same performance kind of segment as our partner cards that are overclocked out of the box. So they did at that time. And if you remember, with the 10 series, it was pretty rare to find a card that was that quote unquote base MSRP price. And I feel like we're going to see the same thing here. As far as I know, we haven't seen any out today. This is, again, day one, so not uncommon for that to be the case. But in my mind, there's not really, unless these don't sell well, there's not a lot of reason for card partners to want to stretch down the stack. Right? If NVIDIA has kind of set the bar at $799 for the 2080 and $1199 for the 2080 Ti, even if you've got your base model, if they're hard to find and they're going to sell through, why would you sell it for less? Now, we don't have the complication of the cryptocurrency mining fiasco going on at this point, which is something that haunted both the 10 series products and the Radeon Vega products as well. So it's kind of it's a different thing. I worry that we won't see $699 versions of 2080 for the foreseeable future, or what is it supposed to be, $999 for the 2080 Ti reference. But if these aren't selling out in a month, then I think you maybe will see some of that. So in terms of should you wait, I think you should wait. It always makes sense not to buy day one, but day 30 and then day 60 is when you start to go, okay, how much are things going to change from the status of that day? And we'll have to see where we're at. But I get the impression that these are going to sell fine. NVIDIA is going to do well. They don't have a lot of competition to push back on them, but we got to keep checking on availability, I guess, from that mindset.
I'm also curious, looking, for anybody who's been waiting to buy a GPU and then waited long enough that they knew this next generation of RTX cards would be coming. So they waited for the announcement. The existing, 1060, 1070, 1080, 1080 Ti boards, 1070 Ti boards, all holding their value, all around like $50 above MSRP. I feel like those prices are pretty much going to stay there until the supply is exhausted, or all of a sudden there is a massive amount of. Well, one of the rumors I heard was that there was a ton of inventory that people are kind of sitting on because a lot of people haven't realized that GPU prices are back down. Maybe not to their lowest, but back close to MSRP, so they're at least affordable without taking out a second mortgage. But I also think that they're going to keep the price on these cards at MSRP and above for as long as they can until the supply of 20 series cards starts to flood the market. Does that sound about right? I just don't see those prices on because I've been waiting to buy a 1070 or a 1070 Ti in like a sub 215 millimeter form factor, and I'm like, I don't think the price is going to come down anymore.
I would agree with that because the prices of the 20 series are higher. There's no reason for the 10 series to come down. If the 20 series were more aggressive on price, you might see that. So, I think last night on our podcast, my pick of the week was a GTX 1080 Ti overclocked, Zotac Amp Edition for $679, which is, $20 below MSRP for that card, for like the reference version of that card when it launched. So, if you look at it and say, well, that's a 1.5-year-old card, that's not that great. But if you look at it in comparison to everything else, it's better, right? If you consider it was $120 less than the Founders Edition of the RTX 2080. Now, my understanding is that the production of the GTX 10 series cards halted quite a while ago, and that the stock that exists in the GTX 10 series is not going to last through the end of the holiday season type of thing. Not something that's going to roll into 2019 very well. The only other thing from a 10 series standpoint to think about is as the mining craze dies off more and more, you're going to find more people. If you're willing to buy a GPU that was used, that was probably mined, right? So hit very hard. So you are going to take an impact there on potential DOA, but and all indications are it's not going to be that huge of a deal. You can find 1080 Ti's on eBay for like $500. Right. So
that's tempting.
It is. Now you're looking at a $500 for a used product versus $800 for a new product that is equivalent in performance today. It's a matter of, are you the type of person that's like, okay, I can spend $500 today. I can get the one of the peak levels of performance that exists in PC gaming. And you know what? If that only lasts me a year, or say in 18 months, the ray tracing and the AI, the DLSS capability actually turns out to be really cool, and the games that use it are awesome, then you might have to sell that off for a couple of $100 and suck it up and buy that RTX card or whatever. So it's just a matter of how much stock you want to put in the RTX, the ray tracing, and the DLSS capabilities that NVIDIA is really pushing with this product. It's also worth noting, I don't think we've really talked about it yet, but the 2080 Ti is $1,200, very expensive, the same as the Titan XP when it launched. But the 2080 Ti at least has the advantage of it's 30 to 40% faster than the 2080 and the 1080 Ti. So it is the new fastest GeForce card that you can get. It's just, like the Titan XP was the fastest, but it kind of, people kind of ignored it a little bit because it wasn't a GTX 1080 Ti product. You can kind of go, that's the stretch. That's for people who want that last, 5, 10% or 15%. The prices have gone up. The barrier to entry has gone up, and that's kind of what we're left with is that. But it is at least the fastest that we've tested so far. So in terms of wow factor, that definitely gets it. The 2080 is a tougher discussion, right? Even pricing off to the side.
I think it gets easier. If in a year, if we turn around and RTX patches are all over the place, there's a ton of RTX real-time ray tracing games, I think then it becomes I get a 2080. But right now it's not an inexpensive piece of hardware.
It was interesting because this is the first time I've ever seen NVIDIA go very heavy on the technology demos and benchmarks before launch, right? So, they provided to reviewers the Star Wars ray tracing demo. They provided us the Final Fantasy, an updated Final Fantasy 15 benchmark with DLSS. They provided us a rough early look at the 3D Mark ray tracing benchmark. They did stuff like that they they've done maybe one of those in the past, But I think they understood the sentiment from Gamescom announcement to the reviews launch that without the weight of ray tracing and AI, which is, I believe a significant portion of this die space that they have integrated, without the emphasis on that, it was going to be really difficult to make that. So they wanted as many ways to impress the reviewers, to impress, readers, that this is something that's real, that, they gave us, if you look on the last page of our story, they sent out a big list of games that will feature real-time ray tracing, games that will use DLSS. There's no time frames affixed to these yet. But, so there's probably not a ton of them that are going to be in 2018, but you've got big names on here like Battlefield 5, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Metro Exodus, Ark. You've got PUBG on here, Serious Sam 4, We Happy Few. There's a lot of games on these lists that I think is, again, NVIDIA trying to show the momentum of this stuff. And, I think ray tracing will catch on more than a lot of people believe, just because it's an additive feature. It is a Microsoft API, right? This is not a custom GameWorks only NVIDIA type thing. NVIDIA's the only card that has acceleration for it, but it's DirectX and Vulkan based Jeep graphics technology. And DLSS is interesting. That is more of a GameWorks feature, right? It's something the developer has to enable in their game. But a lot of that legwork is on NVIDIA to develop the AI application for each game, right? They're the ones that are doing the training. They're not saying, here, game developers, you figure it out. They're saying, hey, game developer, give us a build of the game, which you already give us anyway. We'll do all the legwork and get it in there because we need that selling point for our products going forward. So it's pretty interesting. I don't begrudge anybody for waiting. I think we talked about maybe on the show we've talked about the crazy Tom's Hardware article that talked about don't ask questions, just buy the hardware. I
don't really read Tom's Hardware for the reviews and buying advice.
Yeah, I mean that's fine, and I agree, right? And it was a crazy. It was a crazy, clickbait type discussion, but it set off an interesting debate of like, you're not a lesser PC gamer if you don't have an RTX 2080 today. But if Battlefield 5 comes out, and we don't even know if when it comes out in November, if it's actually going to have ray tracing enabled. It may still come later in a patch, right? And that's right. I think you'll be fine to wait. There's no incessant need to have it. But if you've been sitting on a 9 series card or something for a while and you want to upgrade and you're like, I don't mind spending $100 extra because I feel like I'm future-proofing myself a little bit more or whatever, then I think that makes sense too, right? I don't think people that buy these RTX cards are somehow idiots with unlimited amounts of money. They're just making a different decision.
Yeah, I'm sitting here looking at August 2018 Steam-powered survey, and let's see. Wow. DirectX 12 systems. Windows 10 with the DirectX 12 GPU, that's 9% of the population on Steam. DirectX 11, 13%. DirectX 11 GPUs, 21%. 21% of the DirectX 11 GPUs are Intel HD Graphics 4000, followed by Haswell, followed by Ivy Bridge, followed by Valley View Bay Trail, followed by Cherry View Bay Trail. Finally, at 3.5% of the DirectX 11 GPUs on Steam, you have the ATI Radeon HD 5450. I feel comfortable in saying that, while maybe we should all go out and buy an RTX GPU immediately, you will hardly be in the minority
sure.
of the users. I mean, you're still looking at like 18% of Steam gamers being on DirectX 9.
Right.
No, actually probably something more in the neighborhood of 40% if I'm reading this chart correctly. Between DirectX 9, the shader model 2.0, and then the shader model 2B and 3.0 GPUs, DirectX 10 is still only like 19%. But, the idea that everybody has bleeding edge hardware is kind of crazy. We're still looking at 62% of Steam users gaming at 1920 by 1080. And the second largest resolution on Steam is 1366 by 768. With 14%. You know,
we didn't really say that, did we? But like, if you're gaming at 1080p, this is not the money you should be spending.
Right.
Even 1440p, I would think that was the case. If you look at our benchmarks, our testing only tested at 4K. That part of that was a time crunch, and part of it was like, this is where you're going to see that difference. And I think, you know, if we had more time, we'd probably go back and test 3440 by 1440. You know, but yeah, if even if you're like if you're a diehard 1080p 120 hertz gamer, you don't really need this much power. Now, caveat to that, if the ray tracing is really good looking and it has an impact on performance, you may need it if you want to do 25 by 14 with ray tracing on type of thing. But we'll see. We'll cross that bridge when it comes, I guess, and we can take a better look at it then.
Yeah, I'll be really curious to see what the 2070 numbers look like. I mean,
that's true.
You know, presumably there will be something along the lines of a 2060 at some point, which, you know, may be a profoundly powerful card for 1080p gaming. I'll be really curious to see what rolls out in the none too distant future. And if NVIDIA, if you're listening and you want to tease me about that 2070 release date, so I can hold off for not that there will be a sub 215 millimeter GPU that's a 2070, but if you know of one, by all means, tell me to wait on this GPU purchase.
It also wouldn't surprise me if once you get to the 2060 level and below it, they may not have the ray tracing AI stuff in there, just from a die size perspective. And you know, if they scale the RT cores and the Tensor Core as the die size goes down, which I'd expect them to do, you know, it may be that the ray tracing performance isn't actually good enough on that part to hit 1080p 60 or something like that. And they may actually, there had been rumors for a while that the 2060 and below would actually be GTX parts, indicating that they would not have the ray tracing technology in them, but we'll see. That's not actually been confirmed by anybody. But based on the huge die that the the Turing 104 and 102 are, it wouldn't shock me. Yeah.
Yeah, they are massive. The other news that came out this week, GeForce RTX 2080 Ti. You're not going to be able to. You're not going to be able to pre-order it for another week. That bumps from September 20th to September 27th. Pre-orders of the RTX 2080 Ti are not going to be shipping. Well, I guess they're going to be shipping between the 20th and the 27th. They're going to stagger out the shipments. I mean, are we seeing availability issues already, or did they just get so many 2080 orders that they had to hold off on bringing the 2080 Ti's over from China? I say,
you know, I don't. I don't know. It seems more like to me that the 2080 Ti shipment got held up in customs or something like that, longer than they expected, or something, because they were pretty adamant about the 20th as the shipping date for both of them until very recently, and then it became that will ship between the 20th and the 27th for those pre-orders. So, you know, it sounds like some people's cards are shipping or arriving today, while others may have to wait a few days. But you know, I guess I understand the pain if you're the kind of person who's pre-ordering a $1,200 video card. You kind of want it on day 0, as opposed to having to wait till day 3 or 4. I understand, but
I was waiting for washers for the, you know, there's aluminum crush washers for the drain on the transmission of my wife's car, and you know, that along with 7 other things didn't show up on time from Amazon. So if I can be agitated that a couple of, you know, optical cables and some crush washers didn't ship on time, I can imagine what it would be like if I just dropped all the cash for a 2080 Ti and was being told next week. Card prices are looking.
The 2080, I just looked up. The 2080 is still in stock at GeForce.com. The 2080 Ti is not. It's listed as a notify me. So you can still pay $799 for an RTX 2080 if you want, but not the 2080 Ti is on a hold. But I did see some 2080 Ti's on NewEgg today, I think. For those of you looking to spend the money.
2080, 2080, 2080, 2080 Ti out of stock, 2080 Ti out
Yeah,
of
a
stock.
lot of out of stocks
Ti.
out there.
That was yesterday. They were all showing. Actually, Tuesday they were all showing out of stock.
Okay.
Even the bundles are out of stock for the 2080 Ti.
Boo.
But if you've got
Yeah, give it a little bit.
$830, you can buy a 2080 right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to have to hold off on that. And just for fun, let's take a look at, the shortest 2080 GPU right now is 246 millimeters. So I don't have to worry about ponying up for a next generation GPU for that build because none of them will fit. Damn it.
Oh, true.
Any other thoughts? I mean, I feel in the group, I feel that you are impressed by the technology and desirous of the graphics quality, but frustrated by the current lack of availability of RTX games and the lack of what would traditionally be a more massive improvement in performance over the existing GPUs. Is that a soft and casual summary? I mean, would this be better if they shipped with a half dozen RTX games right now? Would you be much more excited about this?
Oh, for sure. I mean, as long as those games were showed reasonable image quality improvements or neat effects or something like that, yes, I think it would make it a much more acceptable kind of price change. The other thing that I think damages what NVIDIA's trying to do here is that I went back and looked at the transitions, the generational moves. A 780 Ti to a 980, the performance was a little bit in favor of the 980, but not drastically so. But the 980 Ti to the 1080 was a huge jump. It was like 30%. And that's the most recent memory people have, right? So that's kind of what people expect. And the part of the problem for NVIDIA might be that Pascal was so good, it set the bar higher than they had previously had it set for them, and they couldn't live up to their own success, I guess, of that. And as a result, people don't like a deceleration of improvement in their technology, right? Whether it be phones or laptops or processors or graphics cards. And that's what it appears to be. It's what it appears to be today.
So basically, they had an excess of awesomeness, much like people are saying about Apple. There was so much awesome for so long. This more modest level of awesomeness increase is just not doing it.
If you were planning a roadmap in retrospect, you might have held back some of the performance of Pascal because, as it turned out, you didn't need it to beat Vega, all of it, and then your gap would have been bigger today. But that's not what happened. So there you go.
Oh my goodness. I have a way, ladies and gentlemen, to make your planning easier. At least, I don't have a time machine. We can't look back. But let me point out this episode of This Week in Computer Hardware brought to you by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. And it's pretty slick. What they want to do is make it easier for you to buy a home with less stress. And the way they're doing that, look, interest rates, they're finally going up. Everything's unpredictable. What am I going to do when I buy a home? Where are all these people coming in with giant piles of cash to buy a home, especially here in the Bay Area? Oh, my goodness. I don't have my loan lined up. I'm never going to be able to buy a house. Quicken Loans, they're going to try to make your life easier. They're calling it the power buying process. It's really simple. Here's how it works. You answer a few simple questions. They check your credit for pre-qualified approval. Then Quicken Loans will verify your income, your assets, and your credit. They're going to do it less than 24 hours and give you a verified approval. And they're going to give you the strength of a cash buyer. Once you're verified, you qualify for their all-new exclusive Rate Shield approval. They're going to lock up your rate for up to 90 days while you shop. Here's where it gets even better. If rates go up, your rate stays the same. Your rate will not go up. But if rates go down, they're going to drop your rate. Either way, you win. You don't get hurt if rates go up, and you get to take the lower rate if rates go down. It's the kind of thinking you'd expect from America's largest mortgage lender. It's the kind of thing, I think a lot of people wish had been available in the past. If for no other reasons, it just seems so much less painful going through Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. To get started, Go to rocketmortgage.com/twit. Rate Shield approval is only valid on certain 30-year purchase transactions. Additional conditions or exclusions may apply based on Quicken Loans data in comparison to public data records. Equal housing lender licensed in all 50 states. NMLS ConsumerAccess.org number 3030. That's rocketmortgage.com/twit. We want to thank Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans for their support. And, check it out. rocketmortgage.com/twit. Make getting a mortgage less painful. I like that thought.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my goodness. Coffee Lake, yes. Because we haven't seen enough rumors. Because we haven't been watching things sort of triple out. This is the cruelest photo I think I've ever seen on PC Per. So rude.
Yeah.
Let me read Jeremy's opening line here. The S in Coffee Lake S should obviously sound like air slowly leaking out of an air mattress as we now have an idea of the pricing before Intel has officially announced them. So it's a Singaporean site. There's a little currency conversion that may or may not be right, but you're looking like $452 for an i9-9900K. The i7-9700K is going to be $352. An i5-9600K, $251. It's good to be AMD right now. That's all I have to say. Because AMD Ryzen 2 prices are going to give you more for less.
Yeah, it's what's kind of interesting to me about this. If all this pans out, the specs, the pricing, Intel's basically they're reacting to what Ryzen has done. They've created an 8-core, 16-thread environment where people are now expecting that at the mainstream and the high-end desktop spaces. And Intel says, "Yep, we get it. They made the 6-core, now they're doing the 8-core, but they're not going to match the prices exactly that AMD have created. If you look at the 2700X, it's $329, but even though Ryzen and the Ryzen 2000 series have been very successful, the 8700K is still a dominating force in the enthusiast PC space. And I guess they expect the 9900K to do the same thing. And are people willing to pay, I don't know, let's say $50 to $100 more to get the Intel 8-core part versus the AMD highest end 8-core part? And that's a really interesting debate to have, because the 8700K 6-core part is still selling so well. I guess their assumption is that brand and still matters tremendously to these buyers. I mean, do you think doing a system build either for work or for home, that a $450 8-core 16-thread Intel part versus a $370 8-core 16-thread AMD part skews? How's that skew in your mind?
It's interesting. I have for me, every desktop in my house, bar one, is running let me walk that back. Every desktop I've built, in the last year and a half or year, whenever the AMD Ryzen launched, ever since the 1800X, every desktop I've built has had a Ryzen processor. I'm recommending Ryzen processors. Now, I do have some friends that were concerned because there were some relatively obscure but important to them. There were some issues with some calculation difficulties, where you basically needed to exchange your Ryzen processor to fix those. The stuff I do, I'm never going to run into that complication. I have some friends that are Intel loyalists and they do not trust AMD, which is a choice. People specify brands all the time. People have brand loyalty. I think Intel is probably relying on it's not a monopoly, but strength in the and the amount of money, quite frankly, they spend on co-branding to keep Intel strong in the more expensive desktop and gaming machine sales. But boy, if you're a power user looking for more processing power, it's really hard to point at an Intel and be like, well, single core performance is so critical for the one application you run. You should totally be running an Intel processor. You know what I mean? Like, I want to get, I mean, maybe I'm just real simple about this. I want to get the maximum amount of cores and performance I can get for the least amount of money. And I just think AMD's beating Intel on that. Now, maybe AMD is running with, close to no margin, and Intel obviously is trying to preserve their traditional like 25% plus margins on stuff. But I'm just not, I'm not feeling a lot of love for Intel's product lineup right now.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I think the IPC advantages that Intel's cores just for a lot of people win over everything else, right? Single-threaded performance, right. And now if you have the best single-threaded performance, and now you match core and thread count, it's just it will just be the default choice. I don't think that's the right decision necessarily, and I think you should consider a lot of other stuff that goes along with it. But I think that's what we'll see from a lot of it, from a lot of buyers at least. Man, yeah, I will be curious to see what market share looks like in another 12 months. Speaking of processors and market share and price, Athlon's back, like a $55 Athlon CPU. Is that what we're talking about here? The 200 GE. Yeah, this is a super low cost, low TDP, low performance to go along with it. Revitalization, if you will, of the Athlon brand, the 200 GE, 3.2 gigahertz, dual core part. So 2 cores, 4 threads. 3 Radeon compute units. So again, fairly modest performance from a graphical standpoint. But you can get a motherboard for about the same price. You're looking at $110 for your motherboard, your CPU, your graphics. You do need to buy memory, which, as we were talking about last night, is going to cost another $100. Yeah, it's going to be as much as your motherboard and your processor with the graphics integrated on it. So that's disappointing. And then some kind of storage, right? Whether you go with a small SSD or a spinning disk hard drive or something like that, you can build a very reasonable performance gaming PC if you want to do some 720p gaming on mainstream titles, Dota, League of Legends, Overwatch. You're going to be able to do that on this device. And I think it's actually a pretty compelling part. They are going to have a couple of higher end options with just higher frequencies. I don't think, I'm trying to see if they talked about if they were going to have higher shader counts or anything like that. Doesn't look like it. But don't expect a lot in terms of performance, like raw benchmark numbers, right? You're competing kind of against the Core i3 7350K in terms of raw CPU perf, the Pentium G4560. Think that classification of processor, that's what this Athlon 200 GE is really going after. I'm looking through this test. So kind of it seems like this sweet spot of Steam gaming. Once you get a slightly improved, once you save up and spend another $50 or $100 on a GPU. Yeah. In terms of the gaming, like they show Fortnite 720p running at like 32 frames per second. So not tremendous, but more than double the Intel Pentium G4560 or the Core i3 8100. So, don't go, in these graphs, they're comparing them to, Radeon 7950s and stuff like that for some reason. But Star Wars Battlefront 2 720p is playable. Counter-Strike, you're getting about 70 frames per second with the Athlon 200 GE, again at 720p. So pretty, a good performing mainstream part. So you'll be moving to that shortly. Oh yeah, I'm just straight away. I feel like think of how many of those you could buy for one RTX 2080. 24, I think, depending on whether we're counting tax or not. I suddenly feel like a $400 gaming PC build is within reach. What's up with Ampere and their massive ARM server part? So this is a company, we probably talked about this several months back when they kind of came out of their stealth mode, and now they've actually released a product. It is an ARM-based server part. It is a 3.3 gigahertz, 32-core, 64-bit ARM processor. It's built on TSMC 16 nanometer process technology. It can support up to 1 terabyte of DDR4 memory. It's got 42 PCIe 3.0 lanes, all in a single socket. Next generation will support multi-socket. This one is just single socket. It is a 125 watt TDP, so very different than your typical ARM-based processor. But this is targeting the Intel Xeon scalable realm of processors, right? And it's a different class of product. And let me how it says this ARM, this Ampere processor is going to be $850. It doesn't take you very far up the stack on the Xeon line to cross an $850 processor. Right. In terms of raw performance specs, the Intel CPUs are going to be faster. What ARM and its partners like Ampere are really promoting is performance per watt, performance per dollar in these hyperscale production areas. Think places where they're having thousands of machines. The software head at this company talks about look, if you have a lot of custom software that you've built, our solutions may not be perfect for you because you have to recompile and reconfigure your software for an ARM environment. If you're running mostly Linux-based standard stack software, most of that has already been converted over and optimized for ARM, at a large part because of the work that this company has done in the Linux environments, and you'll be able to get up and running relatively quickly. What they're able to do in terms of market share and penetration is going to be interesting because, probably when these projects were started, AMD wasn't a real factor. Now the EPYC line is a factor. They're very much going after single socket server designs with high memory capacity, high PCIe throughput, probably, in the same TDP ranges, but more expensive on cost as well. So it'll be interesting to see how this all pans out. Next month, I'll be at the ARM TechCon event where they will have a keynote talking about the roadmap for their server lineup. And it'll be interesting to see what ARM has to say about this since, they started launching the A76, which is a much larger core with higher performance going after, Intel Core i5 level capabilities. If they are going to continue that trend and make bigger, more powerful cores to kind of go after these secondary segments that aren't mobile phones and tablets.
I don't know. It's yeah, I have nothing useful to add to that because you are way deeper into that than I am, and it just seems like I guess the one thing I get is it's unfortunate that so many companies that are working in stealth mode as startups are kind of getting steamrollered by larger, more established companies that happen to be developing the same thing in a different way at the same time.
Yeah,
that's got to hurt. Probably as much as an employee and engineer working on the project is, say, an investor. The John Petty research, I don't think I've ever actually seen anything, and I've been reading his work on and off for approximately forever. But I wrote an article, Your AIBs Just Got More Expensive. And it's an interesting observation because one of the things a lot of people don't realize is that the tariffs that are being extracted on goods in China and lots of other places, it is interesting because certain items, as well as John Petty writes, quote, essential items such as Apple Watches and hair used for wigs have been exempted. And, there's basically the idea is that you can actually work to get your products or your particular products exempted from the tariffs. And generally speaking, pretty much all the cell phones are exempted from the tariffs because that's pretty much, let's see. Oh, this computer was built in China. This computer, that webcam was built in China. Can we get a shot of Ryan? Everything on the wall opposite the green wall that Ryan is sitting in front of, everything in that room was pretty much built in China.
Pretty close. Yeah.
So you got 200 billion in tariffs on top of 50 billion earlier this year. These are going to go into effect on September 24 at 10%. They're going to climb 25% on January 1st, which means a lot of stuff. For example, add-in boards like GPUs, which is why he said AIBs, are going to get more expensive. Or as Mr. Petty says, add-in board suppliers evidently didn't contribute enough or hire the right lobbyists. And this is, and this is also part of what makes this so Machiavellian, right? Is 10% is going to kick in September. But so they're going to have a minor increase through the holiday shopping season. Then you're going to get schwacked with another 20. Basically, we're going to walk into CES, and we're probably going to hear a lot of vendors basically weeping and gnashing their teeth about increased costs. And this is not just massive vendors, and not all massive vendors, like Apple or Samsung phone division have been exempted. But this is also, one of the companies that was most freaked out about this was the very, very small company that makes the contemporary versions of Moog synthesizers. They're like, all our products are going to go up 25%, and there's nothing we can do about it. We may not have a company next year. Thanks. One of the things Mr. Petty says is, quote, if you could buy a new RTX 2080 AIB today for $800, you should, and think of it as being a discount from what it will cost in January, $1,000. I guess by Monday, it will apparently cost $880, unless, NVIDIA thoughtfully eats the tariff increase, which I'm not particularly holding my breath on.
Yeah, that's funny story. It's interesting because I've been talking to several people about this topic as well, and there's a lot of potential, so something to think about. If your favorite AIC has their cards made in Taiwan, then you're not affected by this. If you're an AIC and your cards are made in China, you suddenly have a 10% to 25% hurdle to have to jump in these, and they're pretty freaked out about it, right? And I think justifiably slow. So, and I don't want to, you're right, we don't want to get too far into the politics of this, but to say that hey, it's pretty cool that Apple devices are going to be spared from it, but everybody else would love to be able to sit down and have dinner with the president and his wife in order to make that happen for their particular product lines. I don't know. I kind of disagree with, if you can buy a card for $800 today, you should, because it might be more expensive then. I think things in the political environment are very fluid and they change quite frequently. But that being said, even if you're not super concerned as a consumer, you are super concerned if you're a channel partner or you're a manufacturer or whatever, right? There's a ton going on there. So.
Yeah, it's going to be painful to be a manufacturer. I'm still digging through some of the paperwork, trying to figure out is all the audio gear I work with about to go up 25% January 1st? Maybe not all of it, but it's a really, interesting look because. Let me give you
a quick. This is the language of how the language in the documentation of the tariffs is difficult to decipher, right? So
it's dense.
The thing that affects, the thing that affects graphics cards and motherboards reads, the description of this line item is printed circuit assemblies not incorporating a cathode ray tube. That is the part where graphics cards and motherboards would be affected by it. If you look at things like power supplies, it would be power supplies suitable for physical incorporation into automatic data processing machines or units thereof. That is what affects power supplies. So it's kind of interesting that I could have looked at, I had to have somebody kind of translate this document for me, which they did graciously, but I would not have been able to guess that printed circuit assemblies not incorporating cathode ray tube would be motherboards, graphics cards, etc. But I imagine that it covers a ton of other stuff too.
Yeah, we're not even getting into the really depressing stuff at the end of Mr. Petty's article. It'll be interesting to see whether or not there's enough lobbying power in certain corners of the industry, and also whether or not, because one of the things that happened in the case of some of the agriculture that's being absolutely hammered by the tariffs is in entire markets moving, to, for example, Brazil. Yeah. I want to say for soy. There's a magical $12 billion relief bill I think they got put through, so that they don't get hammered with, they don't get as brutally hammered with the loss of revenue this year during the elections. Next year, who knows if there's another 12 billion to squeeze out. I've been looking at the tariffs and contemplating how, we talk about consumer electronics. I mean, we talk about motherboards and, laptops and desktops and consoles, and it's going to be really interesting and really messy watching how this all shakes out and what it means to, people who are on a budget. And I don't think it's going to be very good.
Nope.
But
I would agree.
Your cell phones are safe. And we should point out, it's not just Apple's cell phones that are kind of protected from the tariffs.
Sure.
I feel that there was enough savvy in Washington that they knew that making life more difficult for Instagram stars would be really bad, and the people who want to be them. But this is just not a cheerful thing to read about. So let's move on to the next story.
Yep, agreed.
What's going on? There's a little concern by a NewEgg shopper. Slashdot hosted the article. Hackers stole customer credit cards in NewEgg data breach. This is kind of crazy. They somehow managed to inject 15 lines of card skimming code that was sitting on the payments page for NewEgg for a long time, like August 14th to September 18th. That was the report from Jonathan Klinjma, who's works for RiskIQ, researches threats at RiskIQ. This is crazy. This is a company that makes like 2.65 billion, which means they probably are running a lot more than that in credit card charges. 45 million monthly unique visitors. They don't know at this point how many customer transactions were breached. But a heads up, if you shopped at NewEgg, you may want to just call up your credit card company or your bank and tell them to send you a new card now before you have that awesome experience where your stolen credit card numbers are used for 2 days of Uber and Uber Eats in the Bronx, in my case, in one case, and I want to say in Georgia in another case, to fund a glorious weekend of somebody apparently using my credit card to take cash to pay for Uber rides and Uber Eats off of some corner.
Agreed.
Which you all, by the way, aren't going to find out about until the Monday afterwards because of the way the processes are, the transactions are processed at Uber. Not that I'm really bitter about Uber security at this point, or Uber's credit card security at this point, but man, this sucks. I mean, I got hit in the Target breach. I got hit in the Home Depot breach. I got hit in the third breach. Yeah, I mean, I went through 3 debit cards in the space of 18 months. And I feel for you if you are going through that experience. So
not a fun experience. Nope.
Keep an eye on your bank receipts. On those 2 bright and charming notes, as we wait for the 2070 ship date to emerge, anything you can tease that's coming up? Are you guys going to do any more in-depth testing at lower resolutions on the 2080 GPUs, or are you just going to go straight to the 2080 Ti stuff? Or
we've got 2 AIC 2080s and one 2080 Ti to test. So we're looking at those now in terms of overclockability, the coolers, the sound levels. That's really where the differences are: the temperature, sound, and hopefully some overclocking capability. So we're going to look at those first. We got an MSI, an EVGA, and an ASUS card in. So we'll see what those are. I don't know about different resolutions or whatever. We're also kind of we're looking at, maybe how do we dive into DLSS a little bit more, but it's hard to do with just one test. The 3D Mark ray tracing demo will be out in October, early October, I'm told. So that'll be something where you can maybe look at, how does a non-RT accelerated card like a GTX 1080 Ti or 1080 compare, or a Vega for that matter? And will that be indicative of how ray tracing performance exists on in real world games too? Obviously, never quite exact looking at synthetic benchmarks versus that, but there's still a lot more to dive into for sure.
Never exact, but certainly better than nothing, I think.
True.
Oh my goodness. I got a chance to play around with SureCall's latest mobile cell signal booster, the N range. This was really interesting because usually when I've tested these in the past, if you haven't used one, it's the idea that you have a box in your car with an antenna that amplifies the signal when you're sort of, traditionally for me, out in the boonies at the edge of signal range. And what was interesting for me was to get hands-on with this thing right in the middle of, Alameda, California, or I should say sort of on the edge of Alameda, California, over by the estuary, the water. There is some incredibly bad cell phone reception. And it was interesting for me. You laugh, right? But some of the things I learned at doing this review is one of the things SureCall told me is I was shocked because I was taking my my signal level from like negative 111, negative 115 dB up to like 90 or 81. In one case, almost 20 dB, which is unheard of. And there's a couple things going on there. Is one, this thing works. Two, your cell phone signal. If you're running 4G LTE, you actually can probably keep a cell conversation going till almost negative 120 dB, which is a very, very low signal. You would have been dropped out on like 3G or 2G at that point. But what was fascinating for me is running the booster, and in one case taking, I want to say I took my download speed from 13 megabits per second to 26 megabits per second, and my upload speed, right, because you're transmitting when you're upload, from I want to say 3 megabits per second up to like 26 megabits per second, something crazy like that. I don't have the script in front of me, but if you are somebody that uses your cell phone for large amounts of data and you find yourself in areas where connectivity is an issue, it might be worth considering. I would be curious to I didn't have time basically to drive out to my favorite place that has 3G only coverage, which is about 7 hours from where I live. But I'd be very curious to play around with this on the 3G side to see what it does for voice connectivity. But really interesting because they took what they call their extended range technology. They basically put the amplification in the box, or the antenna box, or the antenna, I should say, so that rather than having, the signal can be captured by the antenna and then be attenuated as it gets pulled down the wire to the amplifier, they're actually doing the amplification next to the antenna and then sending the boosted thing down the wire. So interesting product. Got a full review, although I guess I kind of did the whole reveal right there up on Tech Thing. And then Shannon got hands-on with a Nix Play Iris photo frame because she's been looking for an alternative, like the definitive badass ninja. Oh my God, my grandmother is going to, or the child's grandmother is going to absolutely adore these photos, is the Aura Smart Picture Frame. But it's like $300, and at least on Amazon, Nix Play's Iris photo frame is about half as much. And if you're curious whether or not a $150 digital photo frame can be as good as a $300 photo frame, do me a favor, head over to Tech Thing and check out episode 195. Ladies and gentlemen, if this is your first episode of This Week in Computer Hardware, do me a favor, go over to twit.tv/TWiCH. That's where you find information on how to subscribe, all the older episodes, links to where Ryan and I are normally found, a lovely picture of Ryan and a screen and me in the TWiT studio, in the old TWiT studio. Not looking as red as I do now. I will be buying a new bulb. I think I'm just giving up on this bulb that's been on this lamp that I'm using for lighting. And you can find lots of information and, of course, all of the other TWiT programming. If you're looking for Ryan Trout, I suggest you hie thee over quickly. And if you want to learn more about the 2080 GPUs, props to Ryan and Ken. And Ken did like the bulk of the lifting on this one, right?
Yeah, he did. Yep.
Go Ken.
I assigned. Yes.
You assigned. You delegated.
Exactly.
Look at you walking away from founder's disease like a professional.
I'm trying so hard.
So awesome. Props to Ken for that one. Props to you for delegating. And there's a lot of information there to digest if we didn't pack your brain full enough in this episode of This Week in Computer Hardware. You can find me over at TEKTHING.com, techthing.com, the weekly show I do with Shannon. And you can also find me at avxl.com, where Robert and I finally got to record this really in-depth conversation about all the stuff going on at CEDIA, from the insane 8K demo, which is my favorite video demo of all time. There were no soaring eagles. That was a big part of it. To what's going on with the affordable 4K or faux 4K projectors, some amazing speakers, some of the home automation stuff that was going on. And we normally talk about home theater and audio. That's AVXL. And hey, I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for listening to This Week in Computer Hardware. We do it for you, so let us know what you think at Ryan Shrout or at Patrick Norton on the Twitters. And hey, I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll catch you next week on Twitch.